married to a stranger for 15 years, how my loving husband became America's most wanted criminal. Jason and I met in college during our journalism courses. From the very first day, he stood out, charismatic, ambitious, and effortlessly charming. He had a way of drawing people to him with his magnetic personality, quick wit, and easygoing nature. His laughter was infectious, his stories captivating, and his ambitions grand. Jason was the kind of person everyone naturally gravitated towards, and it wasn't long before I found myself completely under his spell. I vividly remember our first date, a spontaneous decision to skip class and drive out to a small lakeside cafe. We spent the entire afternoon sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, and aspirations. Time seemed to stand still that day. By sunset, I knew there was something extraordinary about him. I felt like I had found my best friend, my confidant, and perhaps even my soulmate. As the months turned into years, our bond only strengthened. College life became a whirlwind of classes, internships, late-night coffee runs, and weekend road trips. Jason was always by my side, supporting me through every challenge, celebrating every achievement, and offering comfort whenever I stumbled. It felt like we were unstoppable, two people ready to conquer the world together. Graduation day marked the beginning of our next big adventure. We decided to move to Chicago, a city full of promise and opportunities, a place where we could turn our dreams into reality. The transition was exciting and overwhelming at the same time. Jason quickly secured a prestigious position at a renowned law firm, impressing his colleagues and bosses with his intellect and charisma. He worked tirelessly, always staying ahead, rapidly climbing the professional ladder. Meanwhile, I pursued my passion for art, opening a small but promising gallery downtown. The gallery became my sanctuary, a place filled with creativity, vibrant paintings, and passionate artists. Life felt vibrant and fulfilling. We attended glamorous events, networked with influential people, and created a social circle that became our extended family. Friends often joked about how perfect we were together, a true power couple admired by everyone around us. The initial years in Chicago were everything we'd imagined and more. We traveled frequently, hosted lavish dinner parties, and enjoyed quiet, intimate moments at home. Our lives felt perfectly balanced between professional success and personal happiness. It was a dream life, seemingly flawless, one that others often envied. But as we got deeper into our careers and responsibilities, subtle shifts started to occur in our seemingly perfect relationship. Jason's job became more demanding, and his late nights at the office grew increasingly frequent. Initially, I attributed his prolonged absences to ambition and work pressure, understanding that building a successful career required sacrifices. Yet gradually, Jason's demeanor at home began to shift. His once warm and cheerful presence became distant and withdrawn. Conversations became shorter, his responses curt and impatient. His phone, previously something he hardly paid attention to, suddenly became an object of intense focus. He began to guard it closely, keeping it face down at all times, and it frequently buzzed with incoming messages and calls he refused to answer in my presence. Every time it rang, his expression would shift, becoming tense and guarded. Despite my best attempts to ignore these growing concerns, my intuition told me something wasn't right. The trust and openness that had defined our relationship seemed to diminish a little more each day, replaced by a sense of unease and suspicion. I started noticing small details, strange receipts, unexplained absences, and evasive responses whenever I asked questions. One particular evening, after yet another late-night absence, Jason came home visibly anxious and distracted. He brushed off my concerns with vague excuses, but I saw fear in his eyes, something I'd never seen before. That night, as he fell into a restless sleep beside me, his phone began to vibrate incessantly. Unable to resist my mounting suspicions, I reached for it, heart pounding in my chest. My breath caught as I saw a series of encrypted messages, cryptic codes, unfamiliar names, references to large sums of money. It was then, in that very moment, I understood my husband was hiding something dangerous and profoundly unsettling. My perfect world shattered around me, and I realized our idyllic life was built on lies. Terrified and shaken to the core, I knew my life was about to change forever. The following days were torture as I tried to maintain my composure, pretending everything was normal. Every interaction with Jason felt forced, every conversation filled with unspoken tension. My mind raced constantly, haunted by the messages I'd discovered. Each day brought new anxiety, sleepless nights, and endless questions about who I had married and what he was involved in. Days blurred into sleepless nights after my confrontation with Jason, each hour crawling painfully slow, filled with uncertainty and growing anxiety. I kept replaying everything I discovered about my husband, struggling to accept that the man I'd loved, trusted, and built my life around had been nothing but a carefully constructed facade. My days at the law firm became increasingly difficult. Every conversation felt superficial, every smile forced. My co-workers began noticing my distraction, gently asking if I was okay. But how could I even begin to explain something I still couldn't grasp myself? Each night, returning to our house, once a sanctuary, now felt like entering enemy territory, sent chills down my spine. One evening, a few days after confronting Jason about his lies, I found myself standing in the kitchen, nervously pacing with my phone in hand. After minutes that felt like hours, I finally dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It belonged to Detective Mark Bennett, an old friend from high school who had dedicated his life to law enforcement in our small Californian town. Mark picked up almost immediately, his voice familiar yet cautious. "Hello? Who's calling?" I hesitated briefly before whispering, "Mark, it's me. Olivia." A brief pause followed, then Mark replied warmly, clearly surprised but welcoming. "Liv? Wow, it's been forever. Is everything all right?" As calmly as I could manage, I began explaining my situation, how Jason had changed, the lies I'd uncovered, the strange hours, hidden finances, and an eerie feeling that something dangerous lurked beneath his charming exterior. Mark listened attentively, his tone shifting gradually from cheerful to deeply concerned. "Liv, stay calm," he finally said, trying to steady my trembling voice. "Do you have any solid evidence? Anything specific?" I mentioned the hidden cell phone I'd discovered in Jason's car, the anonymous text messages, large withdrawals of money from accounts I'd never seen before, and finally, the secret storage locker downtown. Mark immediately realized the seriousness and urgency of my situation. "Listen, Olivia, whatever he's mixed up in, it doesn't sound good," Mark cautioned gently, his voice steady yet tense. "But before we confront him directly, we need more solid proof, something we can take to the department. If you feel safe enough, see if you can access that locker, take pictures, document anything suspicious. But please, Liv, do not put yourself in danger." That night, my mind raced endlessly, torn between fear and determination. Mark's advice echoed in my thoughts, but so did the terrifying image of what Jason might be capable of. Despite this, the need for answers outweighed my caution. If Jason wasn't the man I thought he was, I had to know who he truly was. The following afternoon, during Jason's usual unexplained absence, he claimed to be attending a business meeting. I drove downtown, anxiety gnawing at my chest. Arriving at the discreet storage facility, I felt my heart hammering. I had the key I'd discovered hidden in his jacket pocket days earlier, my fingers shaking as I inserted it into the locker's lock. Inside, a dimly lit space revealed neatly stacked boxes and metal file cabinets. My stomach churned as I opened the first box, uncovering countless bundles of cash, stacked neatly, wrapped in plastic. Cold sweat formed at my temples. My breath came in shallow gasps. Moving quickly, I snapped several pictures, ensuring the evidence was clear and undeniable. The second cabinet opened with a reluctant groan, revealing multiple passports, Jason's photograph paired with a variety of unfamiliar names, addresses across the country, even internationally. The weight of what I uncovered hit me like a physical blow. Who exactly was my husband? How long had this been going on? Every document added layers of deception, painting a disturbing picture of criminal activity, money laundering, identity fraud, and possibly worse. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from down the hallway, approaching slowly but steadily. Panic surged through my veins as adrenaline kicked in. Hastily, I replaced the items, closed the locker carefully, and slipped into the shadows of a nearby corridor. My heart thundered painfully in my chest as I saw a figure appear at the end of the aisle. It was Jason, moving cautiously, eyes alert and suspicious. I pressed myself flat against the wall, desperately hoping he wouldn't spot my presence. He paused in front of his locker, carefully examining the area before unlocking it. Watching silently from the shadows, I saw him pull out a document from deep inside, some kind of ledger filled with handwritten entries and numbers. He quickly tucked it into his jacket and closed the locker. Before he turned away, he paused again, sensing something. My breath froze painfully in my chest. After a tense moment, he shook off whatever suspicion nagged at him and disappeared around the corner. My knees weakened as relief washed over me, though brief. Quickly, I hurried out the back entrance and returned to my car, adrenaline flooding my system, leaving me shaking uncontrollably. I immediately called Mark, describing what I'd seen, what I photographed. His voice was firm, professional. "Liv, don't go home tonight. It's no longer safe. Jason might suspect something. Meet me at the police station, immediately." Arriving at the precinct, Mark quickly ushered me into a private room. He reviewed my photos, his expression grave. "Olivia, you did the right thing. This is exactly what we needed. Jason is involved in serious criminal activity. We've suspected a laundering ring operating quietly in town for months, but we never had anything solid. These documents and passports connect the dots." He placed a reassuring hand on my trembling shoulder. "You have to stay out of sight, Olivia. We're organizing a quiet operation to bring him in. Jason's smart and careful. If he suspects you know, he'll run, and he's good at disappearing." I spent the next 2 nights in a secluded motel room, arranged discreetly by Mark. Those hours alone were filled with relentless fear and paranoia, jumping at every sound, checking and double-checking the locks. My phone buzzed relentlessly with Jason's worried, questioning messages, each one becoming increasingly agitated and demanding to know my whereabouts. It took every ounce of my resolve not to reply. On the 3rd morning, Mark knocked on my door, his face serious. "Liv, we're moving in tonight. Our team has him under surveillance. He seems increasingly nervous, clearly sensing something's off. But this ends today. We'll take him down, I promise." I nodded weakly, tears of relief streaming silently down my face. Little did I know, that night would be far more complicated than either Mark or I could ever have imagined. As darkness descended over our quiet town, anxiety and dread intensified my heartbeat. Mark had urged me to remain in the safety of the motel, but staying alone in that suffocating room only amplified my panic. Every minute crawled by slowly, an endless procession of scenarios playing in my mind, each darker than the last. The silence was deafening, interrupted occasionally by distant sirens or cars passing slowly along the highway, each one making my heart leap into my throat. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed sharply, snapping me out of my trance. It was Mark. "We're moving in now, Liv. It's important you stay exactly where you are. I'll call you the moment we have him. Just hold tight." I tried to respond, but my voice caught painfully. After a few shaky breaths, I whispered into the receiver, "Please be careful, Mark." "We will," he assured me calmly before ending the call. The waiting resumed, more torturous than ever. Time lost meaning. Each second stretched endlessly into uncertainty. I paced the small motel room, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper, listening intently for any sign of approaching footsteps, any indication of danger. Around midnight, just as I felt I might lose my sanity from the anxiety, headlights suddenly swept across the curtained window. My pulse surged. Mark had explicitly instructed me not to answer the door for anyone except him. Paranoia clawed at my mind. Who else could possibly know I was here? Frozen with fear, I waited. Seconds later, heavy footsteps echoed outside the door, and a firm yet gentle knock followed. "Olivia, it's Mark! Open up!" Relief washed over me as I hurried to the door, quickly unlatching the deadbolt. Mark stepped inside cautiously, his face tense yet reassuring. Closing the door firmly behind him, he gestured toward the small sitting area. His expression was complicated, relief mingled with something else I couldn't quite decipher. "Is it over?" My voice trembled uncontrollably. Mark sat across from me, hesitating slightly before speaking. "Not yet, Liv," he sighed heavily. "Jason slipped away just as we moved in. He knew we were coming." A chill surged down my spine, robbing me of breath. "But how?" Mark rubbed his temples tiredly. "He's had eyes everywhere. Someone must have tipped him off. Someone close to us. Someone inside the force. We're investigating it now, but this changes everything." Betrayal, fear, and hopelessness tightened around me. Jason had managed to evade justice once again, slipping effortlessly through the cracks of the carefully planned trap Mark had set. The thought of him still out there, free and unpredictable, chilled my blood. "He's dangerous now, Liv," Mark continued urgently. "He's desperate and he's angry. We've got men watching the house, your work, and the motel, but we can't take any chances. We're relocating you tonight to a secure location outside town." I nodded weakly, numb with exhaustion and dread. Within minutes, Mark and another officer escorted me swiftly from the motel room to an unmarked police vehicle waiting outside, its engine quietly idling. The drive felt endless, filled with uneasy silence. Streetlights blurred past, distant headlights illuminating empty roads that stretched into darkness. We arrived after midnight at a small, isolated safe house outside the city limits, a modest two-bedroom home surrounded by tall, shadowy trees. It felt secluded, secure, and yet strangely menacing. Mark led me inside, showing me around quickly and briefing me about security procedures. "I've got officers positioned around the perimeter. You're completely safe here. We're going to get Jason, Olivia, I promise. You just need to stay strong." His tone was firm, professional, but I could sense the uncertainty lingering beneath his calm facade. The first few days in isolation passed agonizingly slowly. Mark kept me regularly informed, updating me on the investigation and Jason's possible whereabouts. Each report ended similarly. Jason remained elusive, always managing to stay a step ahead of law enforcement. Late one night, unable to sleep, I stood near the living room window, staring blankly into the moonlit forest surrounding the house. A sudden movement near the tree line drew my attention, my heart instantly pounding furiously. Squinting, I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than paranoia. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw it clearly, a figure moving slowly, cautiously, toward the house. Fear surged through every muscle as I scrambled backward, grabbing the emergency phone Mark had given me. Hands trembling violently, I dialed Mark's number, whispering desperately when he answered. "Someone's here, Mark!" "Someone's outside the house." "Stay calm, Liv." He spoke urgently, clearly moving swiftly from wherever he was. "I'm on my way right now. Don't open the door. Hide and stay silent." Heart racing painfully, I hurried into the bedroom, locking the door and crawling under the bed, clutching the phone tightly. Minutes passed agonizingly slow, hearing nothing but silence. Suddenly, footsteps creaked lightly across the porch, followed by the horrifying sound of a window quietly sliding open somewhere in the house. Tears blurred my vision, panic nearly choking me. I lay motionless beneath the bed, barely breathing. Footsteps moved stealthily through the house, each slow step tightening a vice of terror around my heart. Then, silence again. Oppressively heavy silence. My body trembled uncontrollably, praying for Mark to arrive. Suddenly, blue and red lights swept through the windows, tires crunching gravel as several cars skidded into the driveway. Voices shouted commands outside, footsteps raced around the house, and finally, after a tense, terrifying standoff, I heard Mark's familiar voice inside, calling out my name urgently. "Liv, it's safe now. We've secured the house. Come out slowly." Shaking violently, I crawled from beneath the bed, slowly opening the door. Mark stood in the hallway, relief washing visibly over his tense features. He quickly moved forward, wrapping an arm protectively around my trembling shoulders. "We got him, Liv," Mark reassured quietly, pulling me toward the living room, where several officers stood securing a handcuffed Jason, his eyes cold and expression unreadable, watching me silently. Seeing him in handcuffs brought both relief and fresh pain, a reminder of the depth of his deception, the devastation he'd caused. Mark explained gently how Jason's arrogance finally became his undoing. In his desperation, he'd exposed himself, growing careless as he attempted to reach me. Surveillance had picked up his movements days earlier. Mark's team had simply waited patiently until Jason made his move. As they escorted Jason outside to the waiting patrol cars, he glanced briefly over his shoulder toward me, eyes filled not with remorse, but defiance. A chill shivered down my spine as he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a lifetime of deception and heartache. Mark stayed with me through the rest of the night, comforting my shaken nerves and reassuring me constantly. Yet deep down, I understood life could never return to normal. Jason had forever altered my sense of trust and security. Despite his arrest, a question remained heavy in my heart. Could I ever truly escape from the shadow of the man I once loved? In the aftermath of Jason's arrest, my life slowly began to settle into a surreal form of normalcy, though nothing could erase the scars left behind by his deception. Weeks turned into months, but even with Jason securely behind bars awaiting trial, his shadow lingered, tainting every aspect of my daily life. I returned to work, attempting to rebuild my routine at the law firm. Yet whispers and curious glances followed me constantly, a painful reminder that my private tragedy had become public spectacle. Colleagues meant well, offering sympathetic smiles or awkward reassurances, but each interaction felt forced, as if they were afraid of pushing too far or triggering another emotional breakdown. My only consistent source of strength was Mark. He visited regularly, sometimes professionally, offering updates on Jason's case, but often simply as a friend, checking in to make sure I was coping. Our friendship, born out of shared trauma, had grown stronger, becoming a foundation of emotional stability amid the chaos. As the trial approached, the pressure mounted significantly. Prosecutors frequently called, prepping me endlessly for my testimony. Each session reopened fresh wounds, forcing me to revisit painful memories, buried beneath layers of denial. Jason's lawyers attempted multiple strategies to intimidate me, subtly hinting through their questions that I bore responsibility for Jason's descent into crime, even suggesting I had known more than I claimed. Each insinuation pierced deeply, further eroding my confidence. The courtroom atmosphere was electric with tension on the first day of trial. Cameras gathered outside, reporters hungry for scandalous details of Jason's double life. Entering the courtroom felt suffocating. Jason sat calmly at the defense table, impeccably dressed, appearing confident and unbothered, as though this were simply another business meeting. Our eyes met briefly, a single cold glance that sent a shiver through my spine. As I took the witness stand, my heart pounded furiously. Mark offered an encouraging nod from the back row, a silent pillar of strength. Question after question forced me to relive every lie, every betrayal. Jason's carefully hidden phone, the secret locker filled with passports, cash, and mysterious ledgers. I recounted the terrifying night Jason broke into the safe house, still haunted by memories of hiding beneath the bed, terrified of what he might have done had the police arrived just minutes later. Throughout my testimony, Jason remained stoic, revealing nothing, maintaining his facade even now. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, financial documents detailing Jason's extensive involvement in identity theft, fraud, money laundering, and his connections to larger criminal networks stretching across multiple states. The defense attempted to discredit my testimony, labeling me emotionally unstable, implying motives of revenge for an imagined betrayal. Mark testified as well, describing the meticulous investigation, Jason's cunning evasions, and finally, the chilling confrontation at the safe house. His words resonated powerfully, reinforcing the severity of Jason's crimes. The trial lasted weeks, each day more emotionally draining than the last. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated agonizingly slowly. For days, I waited anxiously, unable to sleep, barely eating, constantly battling a mixture of fear, hope, and dread. When the verdict finally arrived, Jason was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and aggravated burglary. I felt a brief flash of relief. Yet beneath it lingered a sadness that couldn't be fully explained. Weeks passed following sentencing. Jason received 15 years, a sentence that felt simultaneously severe yet inadequate considering the devastation he caused. Gradually, the media moved on. Public curiosity faded, and I was left alone with the challenging task of reclaiming my identity. Months later, on a quiet evening, Mark invited me out for coffee, away from the noise and memories of the town. Sitting in a quiet cafe, he asked gently about my future plans. For the first time, I realized I had no clear answer. My old life had been shattered. The woman I once was no longer existed. Mark sensed my hesitation and offered softly, "Maybe it's time to leave this behind, Olivia. Start fresh somewhere new." His suggestion planted a seed in my mind, one that grew stronger with each passing day. Eventually, I decided he was right. Staying in this town, constantly reminded of Jason's betrayal, would never let me fully heal. With Mark's help, I planned my move to a small coastal town far north, where no one knew my name, my story, or the shadow of Jason's crimes. Saying goodbye was bittersweet, especially leaving Mark, whose unwavering support had helped me survive the darkest period of my life. On the day I left, Mark met me outside my empty home, handing me a small package. "It's something to remember who you are," he explained quietly. Inside was a delicate necklace engraved with a single word: strength. As I drove away, tears blurred my vision, but I felt hopeful for the first time in months. Settling into my new life wasn't easy. Trusting again proved difficult. Every new acquaintance triggered suspicion. Every stranger's kindness felt deceptive. Yet slowly, day by day, I began reclaiming pieces of myself. I opened a small law practice, far simpler, but more fulfilling than the career I once chased relentlessly. Life eventually regained some balance, yet Jason's shadow lingered distantly, a reminder that true healing required more than just distance. Then, nearly a year later, my phone buzzed unexpectedly, a call from an unknown number. Answering cautiously, I heard the familiar, controlled voice of Jason from prison. Panic surged, stealing my breath instantly. "Olivia," he began calmly, coldly. "You think you've won, don't you? But remember, I won't always be here. Someday I'll find you." Before I could respond, the line disconnected abruptly, leaving only deafening silence. My heart hammered wildly, terror flooding back, but this time anger surged equally strong. Instead of retreating into fear, I immediately called Mark, detailing Jason's call. Mark's reaction was swift, decisive. "He won't ever harm you again, Liv. I'll make sure of that personally. It's time we end this." Mark reopened investigations, uncovering further crimes Jason committed from prison, including orchestrating intimidation campaigns against witnesses and manipulating guards. Jason faced additional charges, extending his sentence substantially, effectively guaranteeing he'd remain locked away indefinitely. Despite finally achieving justice, the scars Jason left were permanent reminders of the price I paid for trusting too easily. Still, his betrayal didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me, stronger, wiser, more aware of my inner resilience. Mark remained my friend, a constant reassurance, occasionally visiting, reminding me that not everyone wears masks, not every kindness conceals deceit. Years have passed since that chilling call from Jason. Today, standing on my porch, overlooking the calm waters of my new hometown, I finally understood clearly. I wasn't defined by Jason's betrayal or the trauma he caused. I was defined by my strength, my courage to survive and rebuild. I took a deep breath, letting the ocean air cleanse my spirit, releasing finally the last traces of fear. I was free.